For many, the act of deconstructing their faith is an escape from a system defined by rigid, fear-based rules. If you grew up in that environment, you have likely seen the letters of the Apostle Paul used to build those walls. Modern institutions frequently cite his writings to enforce strict purity codes and institutional compliance, creating a deeply anxious relationship with the divine. But reading those letters outside the hyper-literalist echo chamber reveals a staggering irony. The modern evangelical church, while claiming to champion the New Testament, has executed a massive historical U-turn. Modern Christianity has slipped right back into the past. By turning Paul's letters into a new version of Old Testament law, obsessing over who is in and who is out, the church has resurrected the exact first-century system of external boundaries and legalistic compliance Paul fought against. Paul had a specific name for this oppressive framework. He called it the Jerusalem below, a state of spiritual bondage where faith is reduced to institutional compliance and the appeasement of a demanding authority. Paul was not the warden of this rigid system. He was the person trying to show his followers that the doors were already unlocked. In the 4th chapter of Galatians, Paul shifts the entire method for how we are supposed to read and apply Scripture. He points to the Old Testament story of Hagar and Sarah, but he links Hagar specifically to Mount Sinai, associating that heavy external law with a covenant of bondage. Then, in verse 24, he makes a claim that literalist traditions tend to gloss over. He says these things are an allegory. Using the Greek term allegoromena, Paul explicitly tells his audience not to look at the flat history on the page, but to search for the meaning beneath it. He wanted his readers to see these stories as maps of the human soul. The rigid rules and physical locations represent internal realities, not just historical facts. When the literalist lens is removed, the text functions as a psychological map for liberation. It moves the conversation from the behavior of the body to the state of the mind. Paul defines the Jerusalem below as a religion of the exterior. It's an obsession with checking the right boxes and keeping exact rules to satisfy a distant power. He contrasts this with the Jerusalem above, an internal state he says is entirely free. This vision of freedom reappears at the end of the Bible. In Revelation chapter 21, John sees the New Jerusalem descending from heaven. John includes a radical detail, upending traditional religious structures. He sees no temple in this city. In this ultimate spiritual reality, the external institution disappears. Because the connection with the divine is entirely internal, the physical temple is no longer necessary. When you are deconstructing, it feels like your faith is collapsing. But that collapse is often the necessary removal of the external temple, so a genuine internal conviction can finally take root. This shift requires changing our core motivation. We move from the anxiety of trying to appease a wrathful deity to the process of aligning ourselves with a God of unconditional love. If the connection to God is internal, spiritual growth is no longer about maintaining an institutional reputation. It becomes the lifelong, patient practice of reordering our own self-centered impulses so we can reflect that love more clearly. This changes our daily perspective. We stop policing who is in or out of the group and begin to view a broken world through the eyes of compassion. Rejecting rigid institutional rules is the final step in leaving the historical bondage of the Jerusalem below. Your frustration with a controlling system is the first sign of an awakening. True spiritual development isn't leaving spirituality behind. It is stepping out of the external prison and looking up to secure absolute internal freedom.